Evil.
Good God, y'all. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing.
Actually, not really. Hello, and welcome to another discussion of the philosophy of Saint Thomas Aquinas. My name is Dr. Joe McGee. In a prior video, I looked at what evil is according to Saint Thomas Aquinas. It is not absolutely nothing, but a certain kind of nothing, a privation or lack of a due good. Today I would like to talk about the problem of evil, that is, the problem evil poses for belief in God. It is a sad fact of the world that it contains a superabundance of evil: injury, disease, disability, death, natural disasters, hurricanes, earthquakes, tsunamis, floods, fire, drought. In addition, there are man-made evils: injustice, violence, rape, torture, murder, war, genocide. In the face of all this pain and misery, it is obviously a challenge to believe that there is an all-good, all-powerful God who has loving care for his creation. Indeed, the problem of evil is the major challenge to belief in God in general, and Christian belief in particular. If anything could definitively prove there is no God, evil is the only reality that might. However, by considering evil in the light of the philosophy of Saint Thomas Aquinas, one can begin to see how evil is at least not incompatible with belief in the God of classical monotheism. In my last video, I examined how, because evil is a privation of due goods according to Aquinas, God does not and cannot be the direct cause of evil. In this video, I will examine the relation between God's omnipotence and evil to see how, according to Aquinas, evil is sometimes necessary for certain natural and moral goods. Such insights do not totally solve the problem of evil, for they explain the reasons for evil only at a general level. I believe the most complete answer, while building on these philosophical insights, in the end requires religious faith, and ultimately promises that a final explanation and resolution lie beyond our capacity to see in this life. More on that later. The problem of evil is presented philosophically as an argument against the existence of God of classical monotheism. If God is all good, he would want to eliminate all evil. If God is all powerful, he can do anything he wants, so he would be able to eliminate all evil. Therefore, if God exists, there would be no evil. But there is evil. Therefore, an all-good, all-powerful God does not exist. As it is given here, this argument is valid. The question is whether the premises are true, and so whether the conclusion really follows. Obviously, theists admit that premise 4 is true. Evil is a sad fact of the world. So to determine whether one should conclude that there is no God, one has to determine whether the other two premises are true. To do so, we need to understand what evil is, but also what we mean by saying that God is all good and all powerful. In the last video, I examined what Aquinas means when he says that evil is a privation. Evil is not some thing in its own right, like some dark seeping ooze that invades goodness and destroys it. No, evil is not a thing at all, but the falling short, an emptiness, or non-functioning in something else. It is the lack of being or perfection which is supposed to be present in something good which does exist. Thus, evil is not created. It is a lack, and the lack results from good things pursuing their own perfection at the expense of goods of other things. Lions, according to the perfection of their nature, cause the privation of life of gazelles. God causes lions to have the nature they have, but permits the evil that nature entails. Likewise, God does not cause people to choose moral evil, but causes people who are by nature free to exist. They, not God, choose moral evil by failing to act according to the rational demands of their nature, and they freely fail to give to others what is due to them according to their nature. God, again, in causing the good of free moral agents, does not cause their actions to be deprived of moral goodness. The free agent is completely responsible for that, but God permits the moral evil of some of their free choices. But even if it is granted that God does not directly cause natural or moral evil, some object that if he were all good and all powerful, he would nevertheless prevent evil. But is this true? Could an all good God prevent all evil? An obvious, if facile, answer is sure. If he did not create anything at all, there would be no opportunity for privation of good to occur. But that is not very interesting, and it does not address the evil we see does in fact occur. Rather, the atheist claim really is that if God is all good and all powerful, he could create the good of our world without the occurrence of any evil. Thomas Aquinas takes up this question in Summa Theologiae, Part 1, Question 22, Article 2, when he asks whether everything is subject to the providence of God. As an objection to his position, he writes, "Further, a wise provider excludes any defect or evil, as far as he can, from those over whom he has care. But we see many evils existing. Either then God cannot hinder these, and thus is not omnipotent, or else he does not have care for everything." Aquinas, however, shows that given what we know about the nature of material living things and of free moral agents, God could not prevent all natural and moral evil without sacrificing greater good. And moreover, there is good reason to think that in his goodness, God would not want to do this. To see why, one has to consider what God can do, and whether there is any limit to what an all-powerful God is able to bring about. For Aquinas, the only thing that God cannot cause is what cannot exist, that is, what is logically impossible. Part of the reason theists, or at least Christians, claim that God is all-powerful is precisely because he is believed to do impossible things, such as raise the dead, walk on water, or turn water into wine. But in all of these miraculous cases, what is impossible is that things act in a particular instance in a way that is contrary to how we understand they normally act, but not in ways that are contradictory in themselves. Water does not normally turn into wine, but when it is wine, it is not still water. Wine cannot be both wine and water, that is not wine, at the same time and in the same respect. Aquinas, however, argues that even God cannot cause what is logically contradictory, not because God lacks some ability to act, but because such contradictory things are not and cannot be things at all. Such things cannot exist. A famous example is the rock too great for God to move, but there is also the married bachelor and the round square. Such things contain a contradiction in their description, and so would have to both be and not be at the same time and in the same respect. The famed immovable rock would have to be simultaneously both subject to and not subject to a creator God. A married bachelor would have to simultaneously both have and not have a wife, and so on. Once one sees this trick of describing things with contradictory attributes, one can extend the list of things God cannot make or do. God cannot make a one-ended stick, or a bigger half. God cannot create another God, or commit suicide. So is it possible for God to create something which did not suffer natural evil? The natural evil we know about is all grounded in the destruction of the body of living things. Living things suffer natural evil precisely because they are material, because their nature enlivens matter, and life is a process of acquiring matter to sustain bodies and shedding or excreting matter so used. Material life is a transitory process, and the matter of any given thing is susceptible to becoming the matter for different creatures. Just what it means to be a material thing is that it has a tenuous and transitory hold on nature, which is sought by other material living things. So material nature seems to require the good, perfection, and existence of one thing, sustaining itself by causing other material things to suffer loss, the privation of their perfection. And of itself a material thing, by not sustaining itself with the matter of other things, withers, starves, or decays, but eventually its matter is incorporated into some other material thing. Could God create things immune to this kind of natural evil? Well, if there were or could be things without bodies, they might be immune from the harm or destruction of losing matter, but we couldn't possibly know whether they might suffer some other kind of injury, since our whole understanding of injury or harm depends on the presence of bodies. But the material things we do know about are good. Yet for there to be material things that were naturally not susceptible to suffering, harm, or death would be logically impossible. Aquinas says, in reply to the objection raised before, corruption and defect in natural things are said to be contrary to some particular nature, yet they are in keeping with the plan of universal nature, inasmuch as the defect in one thing yields to the good of another, or even to the universal good. For the corruption of one is the generation of another, and through this it is that a species is kept in existence. Since God then provides universally for all being, it belongs to his providence to permit certain defects and particular effects, that the perfect good of the universe may not be hindered. For if all evil were prevented, much good would be absent from the universe. A lion would cease to live if there were no slaying of animals. Predators who ate no prey wouldn't be a contradiction, and living material things which did not need to assimilate the matter of other things, eat, and which could not have their matter assimilated by other things, die, would be as contradictory as a married bachelor. To have a universal order of material nature is impossible without natural evil, and even God cannot will it so, if he wills it. Of course, death and natural evil were not originally part of God's plan for humans, according to Christians. Human death itself is a consequence of moral evil. Aquinas, as a Christian, believed that the first human parents lived in the Garden of Eden in an original harmony with God. They were immortal and not subject to harm and decay. But God bestowed this immortality by a special miraculous favor, not by changing the nature of material being. Given what we know about life on Earth, we can see further how this truth plays out. The water cycle and weather patterns which make life itself possible also give rise to hurricanes, flooding, and even earthquakes. The tendencies of genes to mutate gave rise to great diversity of life through evolution, but also gives rise to cancers. Such natural goods and the greater good of a universal order to nature are impossible without concomitant natural evils. This is the harsh reality of the world we live in, but it does not indicate it was not created by an all-good God, constrained by material nature. If a better world was possible, it does not take away the goodness of the material world that is. So given that natural evil accompanies material natures, Aquinas goes further in noting that there are even greater moral goods that are impossible without natural or moral evil, or both. Continuing from the text before, if all evil were prevented, much good would be absent from the universe. There would be no patience of martyrs if there were no tyrannical persecution. Thus Augustine says, Almighty God would in no wise permit evil to exist in his works unless he were so almighty and so good as to produce good even from evil. Not only is the universal order and harmony of nature impossible without natural evil, moral goods are impossible without permitting both natural and moral evil. First, a world populated with indestructible physical beings severely limits morally significant choices for free moral agents. If human beings cannot suffer death or any physical harm, they cannot obey or disobey a command not to kill, nor to care for vulnerable children, the injured or the aged. Just as an injunction against psychic assault or non-consensual mind probes in our world is obviated by the limitations of our mental abilities, so without the possibility of natural evil, most morally significant actions would likewise not be possible. Our material world is just what makes possible the greater moral goods of compassionate care, moderation, and justice. And these moral goods outweigh the natural evils on which they depend. Again, God could prevent moral evil by not creating free moral agents. Without free moral agents, there would be no moral evil, but then there would be no morally good choices to love and care for others who need our care either. There is a great good in creating free moral agents, since only such free agents are capable of love. But could God create free moral agents and yet prevent them from making morally evil choices? For Aquinas, God is the cause of all actuality in the world, but he causes agents to act according to the nature he gave them. So he causes free agents to act freely. And as we noted in the video on the nature of evil as a privation, God causes all that is good and perfect in free creatures' free acts, If there is any defect or privation in a free act, the free creature is the cause of such moral evil by freely pursuing a lesser or inappropriate good, and depriving his actions of the rationality, the goodness or perfection which his act is supposed to have. Famously, Aquinas notes that it is possible that God could grant a special grace whereby the free agent freely did not fail in knowing the true good or in freely choosing to pursue it. So technically, it is not logically impossible for him to create free agents and yet prevent moral evil. It should be noted, though, that God would have no moral obligation to give the grace which would so prevent such evil. Thus, in willing free creatures, Aquinas believes, it is not strictly logically necessary that God must allow there to be moral evil. Aquinas thus would not accept the so-called free will defense. But if God does not prevent such moral evil, Aquinas, following Augustine, says it is because moral evil is conditionally necessary in order for him to draw greater good from it. For some specific moral goods are logically impossible without accompanying evils, and even an all-powerful God cannot do what is logically impossible. There could be no compassion, curing, or comfort without the existence of pain, suffering, disease, and death. There can be no patience, courage, or heroic sacrifice without hardship, danger, pain, and death to struggle against. And sometimes these natural evils are caused by free agents who choose moral evil. And at an even higher level, some even greater moral goods are impossible without moral evils. There can be no repentance, forgiveness, or redemption without moral failures to repent of, to forgive, or to redeem. It is rare to see on a human level, but relationships can achieve a greater goodness and beauty when one party forgives and heals a betrayal, a goodness and beauty not possible had there not been the betrayal. While not a necessary conclusion of this line of reasoning, it opens up the possibility for Christians to see the fall of Adam and Eve as the felix culpa, the happy fault, which was the occasion for God to redeem sin and suffering through the voluntary sacrifice of his Son in Jesus Christ. God then does not create the evil in the world, natural or moral, but he does permit it, in that he creates the good things in the world which suffer natural evil or commit moral evil. With the evil occurring or being a natural part of the world, it provides the necessary conditions for greater goods to be drawn from them, goods logically impossible without them. So given what we know about the nature of evil and God's omnipotence, we can revise the argument against God's existence from evil from the beginning of this discussion. The original argument stated, if God is all good, he would want to eliminate all evil. Upon reflection, the truth is, if God is all good, he would want to maximize good. The original argument also stated, if God is all powerful, he can do anything he wants. He would be able to eliminate all evil. Upon reflection, the truth is, if God is all powerful, he cannot eliminate the evil that is logically necessary for greater goods, but permits necessary evil and draws greater good from it. The original argument concluded, therefore, if God existed, there would be no evil. Upon reflection, the truth is, therefore, there should be evils necessary for greater goods. Again, accepting the reality we can all admit, but there is evil. Finally, the original argument came to the conclusion, therefore an all-good, all-powerful God does not exist. Upon reflection, the truth is, therefore an all-good, all-powerful God is not impossible given there is evil. Some qualifications. One should note the limit of this theodicy. Neither I nor Aquinas am saying that God causes natural or moral evil as a means to bring about greater goods. A God who did that has rightly been likened to a cruel schoolmaster or mad scientist who makes subjects better by torturing them. Here, the sadist is the cause of the evil, and while good may result, the sadist has no right to inflict it. However, since evil is a privation of goodness, it cannot be caused by an all-good God, the first cause of being. But since evils do occur, given the world he has created, even if he foreknows them, it is not irrational to believe that God allows such evil and uses it to bring about goods that far outweigh them. Moreover, at most we can see that this explanation is cogent only at a very high level of generality. We might accept that earthquakes, tornadoes, and hurricanes are just part of nature, and that disease, death, and decay are just part of life. We might even accept that much good, natural and moral, comes from them. But when a father sees his wife and child swept away in floodwaters, or a mother watches her young son painfully waste away and die of cancer, however true it is, the general theory about the necessity of natural evil will nevertheless seem weak, vain, and perhaps even cruel. Likewise, perhaps much good has come from cruelty and injustice throughout human history. But if we ourselves have been the victim of cruel injustice, to suppose that it is an occasion to right future wrongs or to forgive our enemies could seem absurd. We can accept that good results are possible in the abstract, and even that it actually happens in particular cases, but to one in the midst of physical or moral evil, the general reasoning will often seem vain and hollow. But still, general conclusions can be true, even if they do not seem so when one is suffering. And the general theodicy can and does help victims of tragedy cope with the pain of evil and maintain belief in an all-good, all-powerful God. Finally, as presented here, these observations only go to overcome arguments that evil is incompatible with an all-good, all-powerful God. They only show that it is not impossible that God exists, given the evil in the world. It does not prove that God exists, nor that God actually does bring greater good from all the evil there actually is. This then opens up the atheist's counter-argument. God would allow only the evil that actually produces greater goods. He would not allow any unredeemed or pointless suffering. But we do see pointless suffering. Therefore, there is probably no God. To counter this argument, the theist can only reply by denying the second premise. While it might seem that there is pointless suffering, it must be the case that there is none. All suffering must be redeemed by being necessary for some greater good. And the reason for this, while perhaps unpersuasive to the atheists, are nevertheless true. First, God exists, and there are good reasons to accept that he exists, and that he is both all good and all powerful. Second, our view of the interrelations among the goods and evils we experience, both the theist and the atheist would have to admit, are all rather limited. It has to be the case that it is at least possible there is a big picture, wherein all evil is necessary, and if so, we would see only a very small part of it. But in this small part, we know that some evil is necessary, and while some evil seems to be senseless, it is likewise possible that even the seemingly senseless evil too is necessary when viewed from a view unavailable to us finite creatures. Third, since there is good reason to believe that there is a God who is not only all good and all powerful, but all knowing as well, there is good reason to believe that there is this big picture, and that all the evil in the world is necessary for greater goods, and for an overall universal greatest good. Fyodor Dostoevsky, in a celebrated passage from the Brothers Karamazov, explores this big picture in vivid, heartbreaking detail, which culminates with the seemingly most senseless evil of a small child being thrown to hunting dogs and torn to pieces before his anguished mother. The character of the atheist brother Ivan rails against the absurdity of supposing there could be some universal harmony that renders such evils not senseless, but necessary and redeemed. Such a big picture is supremely absurd, he says, unless there were in all the world a being that has both the ability and the right to forgive these evils, which even these child victims and their aggrieved mothers would not have. Only in the light of such a being could there actually be any big picture which precludes the senselessness of evil. The young novice monk character, Alyosha, as a Christian, retorts that there is such a being, both able and entitled to forgive and redeem all the apparently senseless evil, since he is its victim most of all. He is referring, of course, to God himself, made incarnate in Jesus Christ. From God's perspective, says the Christian, no evil is senseless. All is necessary and redeemed. Ivan's response is to relate his poem of the Grand Inquisitor. It is too much to explore the portrait of Jesus which Dostoevsky gives in this poem, But in general terms, it is of a God who so totally loves and respects human beings and their freedom, infinitely more than they do themselves, far beyond any human capacity to love. This God of ultimate unconditional love even embraces the Grand Inquisitor himself, who fully and finally betrays that love.
And if ever anyone deserved our fires, it is you. Tomorrow I shall burn you. Go. Don't come to us anymore. Don't come at all. Never. Never.
Only such a God is sufficient to completely resolve the problem of evil, and this declaration is perhaps the most shocking and audacious claim a Christian can make. And not all can accept it. Ivan the atheist cannot. It demands too high a price for him to pay, and he wishes merely to return his ticket to existence. It is too big a topic to explore any further here. In another video, we can look at how Aquinas understood how Jesus redeems evil through his death on the cross, especially the evil of the sins of each of us. Faith in the power of such love is, in the end, the only thing that can approach a full answer to the problem of evil. The philosophy of Saint Thomas Aquinas gives some insight into how the existence of evil does not prove that an all-good, all-powerful God is impossible. From the fact that evil is a privation, and that even an all-powerful God cannot bring about effects that are logical contradictions, God allows the evil necessary for greater goods he positively desires. And as hard as it is to see or accept, all the evil in the world must be necessary when seen from God's perspective. And for the Christian, in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, all this evil is redeemed, and God's good creation ultimately will be restored and more. Evil is a hard problem, philosophically as well as personally and existentially. Tell me what you think. Could there really be a big picture? Is a God who loves so totally too much to accept, given the depth and breadth of evil in the world? Let me know in the comments. Also, please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more videos about Saint Thomas Aquinas, the philosophy of religion, and the Catholic faith. Thanks for watching.